What if I told you that most people aren't free, not because of governments or corporations, but because of their own minds? That the invisible walls surrounding your life weren't built by society alone, but by the way you think, the habits you follow, and the fears you refuse to confront? We live in a world obsessed with freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of choice, freedom of movement. But there's one form of freedom almost no one talks about: the freedom from yourself. And until you confront that inner prison, no amount of money, success, or external liberty will make you truly free. This is the hidden philosophy of self-imprisonment, and the journey to break free from it will force you to question everything you've ever believed about success, happiness, and identity. Let's begin with a strange paradox. The more freedom we seem to have, the more trapped we feel. We live in a time when you can choose from thousands of career paths, move to almost any country, or reinvent your identity online with the click of a button. And yet, anxiety, depression, and existential dread are at an all-time high. Why? Because the overwhelming freedom to choose has become a burden instead of a blessing. Jean-Paul Sartre called this condemned to be free, the idea that, in a world with no fixed meaning, we're forced to create our own purpose, our own values, and our own destiny. And for many people, that responsibility is terrifying, so we look for ways to avoid it. We numb ourselves with distractions, we cling to ideologies, we let others decide who we should be, and over time this avoidance becomes a prison, a comfortable, invisible cell made of routines, opinions, fears, and borrowed beliefs. We lock the door ourselves and we throw away the key. Think of the person who works a job they hate for decades because they fear instability, or someone who stays in a toxic relationship because they fear loneliness, or the millions who never pursue their dreams because they're scared of looking foolish. These people might look free on the outside, but internally they're imprisoned by fear, and that fear doesn't need bars to hold you back. It just needs your silent consent. Now, here's where it gets even more dangerous. Most people don't realize they're in a prison because the walls are made of comfort. The psychologist Erich Fromm once said that true freedom is not just the absence of external constraints. It's the courage to face uncertainty, responsibility, and the pain of self-discovery. But most people would rather be comfortably miserable than risk the unknown, and this is how we become our own jailers. We become attached to our labels, our traumas, our roles in society. We say, "I'm just not a creative person," or "I'm too old to start over," or "This is just who I am." And each time we repeat those lines, we're tightening the chains. We're telling ourselves a story about who we are, and that story becomes our cage. Carl Jung believed that the most dangerous aspect of the psyche was the shadow, the parts of ourselves we reject, ignore, or fear. These repressed parts don't go away. They fester. They distort our perception of reality, and they keep us locked in cycles of self-sabotage. We think we're making rational choices, but in truth, we're being ruled by a hidden script we didn't write. The script that says you must always be nice. The script that says you can't outshine others. The script that punishes you for wanting too much. Breaking out of this prison doesn't begin with changing the world. It begins with confronting your shadow and questioning the stories you've told yourself your entire life. This is where philosophy becomes not just an intellectual pursuit, but a weapon for liberation. The Stoics taught that freedom begins when you stop being a slave to your emotions. Epictetus was a literal slave who found inner peace not by changing his circumstances, but by mastering his perception. Nietzsche went further. He believed we must overcome ourselves. Not conform to some moral ideal, but become who we truly are by embracing chaos, contradiction, and willpower. And Kierkegaard warned that the greatest danger to the self wasn't suffering, but despair. The slow, quiet erosion of your soul when you live a life that isn't yours, when you pretend to be something you're not to avoid pain, when you wear masks until you forget there was ever a face beneath them. So how do you escape this illusion of freedom? How do you break out of a prison you can't see? First, become aware of the cage. Notice where your life feels automatic. Ask yourself, who told me I had to be this way? Whose voice is this fear speaking with? Often you'll find it's not your own. It's a parent, a teacher, a crowd. Second, reclaim your responsibility. Yes, it's terrifying to admit you have more power over your life than you thought, but it's also liberating. Every time you blame others, you give away that power. Every time you choose comfort over growth, you reinforce the walls. But every time you take an honest risk, speak your truth, follow your curiosity, say no to something that no longer serves you, you're chipping away at the prison brick by brick. Third, embrace discomfort. Real freedom isn't always pleasant. It's often messy, lonely, and uncertain, but it's also the only path to a life that's fully yours. Remember, the caterpillar must dissolve into chaos before becoming a butterfly. And that's not a poetic metaphor, it's biological reality. Growth requires destruction, reinvention demands sacrifice, and freedom always carries a cost. Most people aren't willing to pay it. But if you are, if you're willing to lose what you were for who you might become, then the prison begins to crumble. Not all at once, but piece by piece. There's a quote often attributed to Anais Nin, and the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom. That day comes for all of us. Some run from it, others embrace it. The question is, when your day comes, when the illusions fall away and you realize the life you've built is too small for your spirit, what will you choose? The safety of the cell or the uncertainty of freedom? Because in the end, there is no greater tragedy than to die having never lived your own life. To spend your days performing for an audience that never really cared, to silence your desires for fear of judgment, to wear a mask so long you forget what it's like to breathe. That is the real prison, and the key to escaping it has always been within you. All that's left is the courage to use it.